Evelyn Harper sat quietly on her back porch, the soft hum of the Willamette River barely audible beyond the tall fir trees that framed her modest riverside home. The early morning sun filtered through the mist, casting long, gentle shadows over the weathered wood of the porch floor. She cradled a warm mug of chamomile tea, the steam rising slowly and mingling with the crisp Oregon air. It was one of those rare moments when the world outside felt paused, a fragile stillness wrapping around her like a protective shawl. Her phone buzzed softly against the wooden railing, breaking the fragile silence. With a slow, deliberate breath, Evelyn reached for it, the leather of her worn armchair creaking beneath her. The screen lit up with a notification, a new photo album shared by her daughter-in-law, Jenna. Evelyn's fingers hesitated over the screen, the years of practice teaching her when to turn away and when to look directly at the truth. Today, for reasons she couldn't fully explain, she chose to look. The first image was innocuous enough, bright sunlight bouncing off the river, a picnic table laden with dishes, and her family laughing together. But as she scrolled, a familiar sinking feeling began to settle deep in her chest. Daniel, her eldest son, stood by the barbecue with a beer in one hand, his face flushed with the Oregon summer heat and a grin that had once been reserved just for her. The children were splashing in the river, their wet hair clinging to sunburned cheeks. Jenna sat nearby in a wide-brimmed hat, her smile radiant but distant, almost as if she were performing for the camera. Evelyn's eyes stopped at the caption beneath the photo, "Our favorite place with our favorite people, except for the one who owns the house." Her breath caught. The words weren't loud, but they struck like a hammer against glass, shattering, cold, undeniable. This was her house. The home she had dreamed of for decades, the one she'd painstakingly bought with savings set aside from a lifetime of work. The place she'd poured love and sweat into, building a sanctuary for her family to gather, to heal, to grow. And now, she wasn't there. Not in the photos, not in their plans, not in their hearts this summer. Evelyn set the phone down slowly, hands trembling just slightly. She did not cry. She had learned long ago that tears could be as heavy as the silence that followed. Instead, she let her mind drift back over the years, those vibrant, irreplaceable memories that were hers alone. She remembered the day she first walked into the Riverside real estate office in downtown Portland. It was a chilly autumn afternoon, the leaves swirling in gold and crimson around her feet. She wore her favorite navy blue blouse, the one with the delicate white embroidery along the cuffs, the same blouse she wore when she signed the deed that made the house hers. The weight of the keys in her hand had felt like the promise of new beginnings, a tangible reminder of all the years she had saved and sacrificed. Back then, Evelyn had imagined a future filled with laughter echoing across the water, children running barefoot across the creaky wooden floorboards, and the smell of fresh pine mingling with baked apple pies cooling on the windowsill. The house had been more than just a structure, it was a vessel for dreams, a tangible thread connecting past to future. For 15 years, every summer, Evelyn orchestrated family vacations at that riverside retreat. She was the quiet architect of joy, planning meals, packing extra socks, lining up games for stormy afternoons, and waking early to make pancakes so the scent would greet sleepy grandchildren as they tumbled out of bed. The kids called it Grandma's Camp, a name that made her smile every time she heard it, even as her hands tired from the endless preparations. She paid for every gallon of gas, every sack of marshmallows, every new swimsuit the children outgrew with the steady generosity only a grandmother knows. It had never been about the money, it was about giving them a space where time slowed, where deadlines and traffic didn't exist, and where they remembered who they were before the world pulled them apart. But this year was different. No frantic texts about schedules. No calls to finalize dates or coordinate food. No excited chatter from Jenna or her son. Just silence. Evelyn had told herself not to worry. People get busy. Things get forgotten. Maybe they'd been overwhelmed. Maybe plans were still being made. So, one quiet afternoon in early June, she sent a simple message to Daniel, "Have we thought about dates for the river house this year?" The reply came hours later, wrapped in the thin veil of politeness that only years of delicate family dynamics could produce. "Hey Mom, we're thinking of doing something different this summer. The kids are older now, and Jenna found a spot by the coast, lots of kid-friendly things to do. We figured it'd be easier for you to stay home this time, less packing and travel hassle. We'll FaceTime, promise. Love you. Evelyn read the message over and over, the sting deepening with each pass. It wasn't the choice of the beach over the river. It wasn't even the absence of an invitation. It was the way they had made that decision, without her, around her, as if she were a piece of luggage to be left behind. She sat there at the kitchen table, the half-drunk tea growing cold beside her, sunlight painting golden stripes across the floor. Everything around her remained the same, the faded floral curtains, the chipped paint on the windowsill, the quiet tick of the old grandfather clock. But Evelyn felt changed. She thought of all the lists she had made through the years, the meal plans, the emergency contacts, the meticulous packing. The nights she stayed awake ensuring there were extra batteries for the lanterns, the mornings she woke early to fry pancakes so the house would smell like home. She was not being dramatic. She was not feeling sorry for herself. She was simply seeing the truth laid bare. She had become a fixture in their lives, reliable, predictable, quietly fading into the background. Until one day, someone decided she no longer fit the picture. But Evelyn fit. She had built the picture. She bought the frame. She had been the foundation they all stood on. A heavy ache settled in her chest, not just from being excluded, but from being erased. Later that morning, while sitting on her porch with a lukewarm cup of coffee, the kind that barely warms the soul but fills the hands, Evelyn opened the family album again. She lingered on the photos, each one a quiet betrayal. Her grandchildren laughing with strangers, the fire pit glowing without her stories, the picnic table set without her careful touch. This wasn't forgetfulness. It was a choice. And in that choice, Evelyn found clarity. She remembered the deed in her safe, the keys in her drawer, the control she still held quietly, patiently. Her house. Her name. Her life. And for the first time in a long time, Evelyn understood that sometimes the loudest voice is silence, the silence that reclaims, the silence that sets boundaries, the silence that refuses to be invisible. She looked out at the garden she'd planted years ago, lavender and late-blooming roses, the earth rich beneath her hands. The river flowed quietly nearby, carrying away the weight of unspoken words. And as the sun climbed higher, casting its warm glow over the land she loved, Evelyn felt something shift inside her, a slow, steady fire of renewal. Her story was far from over. The house stood quiet, wrapped in the soft embrace of early morning fog drifting over the Willamette River. Evelyn Harper had lived there alone now for nearly a decade, since the day she'd lost Richard, her husband of 45 years. The old two-story home with its green shutters and creaky wooden floors had witnessed the countless seasons of her life, joy, sorrow, and everything in between. The sprawling oak tree in the front yard still dropped acorns across the porch like little landmines, just as it had for years, marking the passage of time in its stubborn way. The silence of the house was deep, a presence that was sometimes comforting, sometimes heavy. But Evelyn had learned to live with it. She had learned to cherish it, even. After Richard passed, the world outside seemed noisier, more urgent, less kind. But inside these walls, she found peace in quiet moments, the gentle tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the soft rustle of leaves against the window, the occasional chirp of birds who visited her garden. Evelyn had never been afraid of solitude. She found comfort in learning how to live for herself, for the first time in her life. Cooking, for one, she discovered, was a quiet kind of meditation. She spoke often to the framed photographs lining the hallway, images of younger days when laughter echoed in these rooms. The smiling faces of children and grandchildren, frozen in time behind glass, were her constant companions. She whispered stories to them in the evenings, sometimes asking for advice, sometimes simply sharing her thoughts aloud. This house, with its creaking floorboards and mismatched furniture, was more than bricks and mortar to Evelyn. It was a repository of love and memories, a sanctuary where every scratch on the wood and every faded cushion told a story. After years of saving every penny, working long days as an accountant in Portland, she had finally bought this riverside home shortly after retirement. It was the place she had poured her heart into, sanding floors herself, repainting walls in gentle pastels, planting roses along the garden path. Each summer for the last 15 years, Evelyn had played the role of family matriarch with unshakable dedication. She was the quiet force behind the tradition they all looked forward to, the annual vacation at the river house. Grandma's camp, the grandchildren called it, a name that always made Evelyn smile with a mixture of pride and tenderness. The summers were full of simple joys. She would wake before dawn to prepare the kitchen, frying golden pancakes until the whole house smelled like syrup and warm butter. The children would tumble out of bed, still yawning, faces flushed from dreams, greeted by the sweet aroma that told them another day of adventure awaited. Days were spent by the water, swimming in the chilly river, throwing stones, playing board games on the creaky porch. At night, they'd gather around the fire pit, roasting marshmallows on long skewers, sharing stories under a canopy of stars. Evelyn's laughter mingled with theirs, the soft rustling of leaves and the crackling fire weaving a soundtrack of belonging and love. Evelyn didn't ask for help paying for anything. She never once hinted that the gas for the cars, the groceries, or the new swimsuits the kids outgrew every year were burdens. She gave gladly, because this house was her gift to them all, a sacred space where time slowed and memories deepened. But that summer, something was different. The usual buzz of planning was gone. No late-night phone calls to finalize who would bring what. No messages bouncing back and forth about arrival times or special requests. No excited can't wait texts from Jenna, her daughter-in-law, or calendar reminders from Daniel. Evelyn told herself not to worry. People get busy, things slip through the cracks. Maybe they were waiting to surprise her. But the silence stretched on, growing heavier with every passing day. On a quiet afternoon in early June, Evelyn finally reached out. Her fingers trembled slightly as she typed a message to Daniel. "Have we thought about dates for the river house this year?" The reply came 3 hours later. It was polite, but the tone was unmistakably distant, almost rehearsed. "Hey Mom, actually we're thinking of doing something a little different this year. The kids are getting older, and Jenna found a place near the coast with lots of kid-friendly attractions. We figured it might be easier for you to stay home this time, less hassle with packing and travel. But we'll FaceTime for sure. Love you." Evelyn stared at the screen, rereading the words again and again, the sting deepening with every pass. It wasn't the choice of the beach over the river she resented. Nor was it the absence of an invitation that pierced her heart. It was the way they had made that decision, without her, as if she were a burden to be spared rather than a vital part of their family. The words "less hassle" echoed in her mind like a verdict. They had decided she was too tired, too old, too inconvenient. The woman who had spent decades quietly building the foundation for these family memories was suddenly the extra baggage to be left behind. Evelyn didn't cry. She had long ago learned to keep her grief tucked safely beneath layers of quiet dignity. Instead, she sat still at her kitchen table, the sunlight streaming through the windows in golden stripes, casting long shadows across the worn wood. Everything around her remained the same, the faded curtains, the chipped paint on the windowsill, the ticking clock on the wall. But she felt irrevocably changed. Her mind drifted back to all the summers past. The meal plans she meticulously crafted. The shopping lists with every detail accounted for. The emergency contacts she kept updated and accessible. The nights spent packing extra socks, batteries for lanterns, and enough sunscreen to cover every child from dawn till dusk. The early mornings waking before anyone else to fill the house with the smell of pancakes, so the children would wake to comfort and familiarity. She was not being dramatic. She was not seeking pity. She was simply recognizing a painful truth: she had become invisible in the very family she had nurtured. For years, Evelyn had been the anchor. The quiet presence that held everything together. The woman who made sure the house was ready, the meals were cooked, the laundry done, the kids safe and happy. She had been reliable and predictable, quietly fading into the background as the years passed. And now, someone had decided she no longer fit the picture. But Evelyn did fit. She had built the picture. She had bought the frame. She was the foundation. Her breath caught in her throat as tears finally welled up, not from sadness, but from the raw weight of being forgotten. Yet even in that moment of ache, Evelyn remembered her own strength. The strength that had carried her through loss, through long lonely nights, through decades of hard work and quiet sacrifice. She rose from her chair and walked slowly to the hallway, where the photographs hung, silent witnesses to a love that had once filled every corner of this house. She touched the frames gently, as if drawing strength from the memories captured within. This house was hers. The river was hers. The stories and the labor, the love and the loss, they were hers. And she would not be erased. It was a Wednesday morning, cool and crisp with the faint scent of damp earth lingering in the air. Evelyn Harper sat alone on her back porch, the worn wooden chair creaking softly beneath her weight. The early sun cast gentle light through the leaves of the towering fir trees that bordered her riverside home. Her hands, weathered but steady, cradled a lukewarm cup of coffee, the kind that never quite comforts but fills the emptiness in her palms. Her phone buzzed quietly against the armrest, pulling her attention away from the slow dance of light and shadow. She glanced at the screen. A new notification from a shared photo album, one her daughter-in-law, Jenna, had added her to years ago when the family was still tightly knit, when the bonds felt unbreakable. For a moment, Evelyn hesitated. She wasn't sure if she wanted to look. But something inside nudged her to open it. She swiped gently, and the first image appeared. Bright. Vivid, full of life. A snapshot of the river house, her river house. The summer sun kissed the worn wooden porch, the same porch she had lovingly refinished with hours of painstaking work. The old picnic table was set for dinner, candles flickering as dusk settled over the water. In the photo, Daniel stood by the grill, a beer in one hand, his easy smile lighting up his face. The children were scattered around the yard, their laughter almost audible even through the still image, faces flushed from the afternoon swim. But she wasn't there. Jenna sat nearby in her signature wide-brimmed hat, smiling brightly, but Evelyn's eyes caught the subtle distance in her expression, like an actress performing for a scene she was not part of. Other faces appeared in the album, friends of the family, strangers to Evelyn. Couples she had never met, one of whom held her youngest granddaughter on his shoulders, their joyous squeals filling the frame. As she scrolled through the album, Evelyn's breath hitched. Each photo was a small wound, a silent message that she was no longer part of this story. They were there, laughing, playing, living out the traditions she had created. But she was absent. Not only physically absent, but emotionally erased. Her eyes caught on the faded blue cushion she had sewn by hand, the stitching imperfect but made with love. The chipped corner of the coffee table, where Daniel had once bumped his knee as a clumsy 12-year-old, frozen in time. The birdhouse her late husband had crafted, still hanging crookedly on the stubborn oak tree in the yard. All the details she had lovingly nurtured remained, but they were merely props in a play from which she had been cut. The sting was sharp and raw, more piercing than any harsh words could ever be. This was not an oversight or a simple mistake. This was a choice. Her family had decided to move forward without her. Evelyn set the phone down carefully, the screen fading to black, but the ache in her chest remained vivid. She felt a cold clarity settle over her, a hard truth she had tried to ignore. They had taken the house she had bought with her own money, the house she had maintained through storms and seasons, and they had turned it into something else. Something new. A backdrop for memories that didn't include her. In that quiet moment, Evelyn realized the depth of her invisibility. Not just to be left out of a vacation, but to be removed from the very history she had spent years crafting. Her presence had been quietly rewritten as absence. Her hands trembled as she reached for a photo of her and Richard, taken on that very porch years ago. They were young then, faces full of hope and promise, arms wrapped tightly around each other, eyes sparkling with dreams. She traced the lines of the image with her finger, whispering to the memories. She remembered the first time they had walked through the front door, the smell of fresh cedar mingling with the scent of pine needles outside. The nights she stayed awake sewing curtains and mending cushions. the mornings waking before dawn to bake fresh bread and prepare breakfasts that filled the house with warmth. She thought of the years she had spent quietly supporting, sacrificing, giving everything to make this house a home for the family she loved. And now, they had written her out. Evelyn felt a profound loneliness settle in, but beneath it was a simmering resolve. This wasn't just about a summer vacation. It was about recognition, about respect, acknowledgement, and the right to belong. Her eyes drifted toward the garden, where late roses bloomed stubbornly against the early summer sun. She thought about the life she had built here, every nail hammered, every floorboard sanded, every sunset watched alone before the others woke. This house was not just property. It was her story, her legacy. A slow, steady fire ignited within her, tempered by years of quiet strength. They might have taken her out of their photos, but Evelyn was still here. Still holding the keys. Still the owner of her story. Evelyn Harper sat in the quiet sanctuary of her living room, the late afternoon sun casting warm amber hues across the polished oak floor. Outside, the wind rustled through the towering fir trees surrounding her riverside home, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and damp earth. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, as if awaiting her next move. She was no stranger to silence, having lived with it for years since Richard's passing. But this silence was different, heavy with the weight of absence and unspoken truths. The realization that her family had moved on without her, using the home she had built as a backdrop to their new memories, had settled deep within her chest like a stone. But Evelyn was not a woman of rash decisions or dramatic confrontations. She remembered Richard's words, spoken one quiet evening over cups of chamomile tea, when they discussed the fragile nature of trust and generosity. People don't always take with malice, he had said softly, sometimes they just take without asking, assuming you won't notice because you've always given freely. That truth now echoed within her, clear and unyielding. Evelyn rose from her chair, the familiar creak of the floorboards beneath her feet a small comfort. She moved deliberately to the large mahogany desk in the corner of the room, where she kept the important papers that chronicled decades of her life. There, beneath the neat stack of invoices and letters, lay the deed to the riverside house, a document with her name printed clearly and boldly. Sole owner. The words held more power than any conversation could. She ran her fingers over the smooth paper, feeling the embossed seal beneath her touch, grounding herself in the reality that, despite everything, this home was hers. Her gaze shifted to the small notebook on the desk, the one where she kept the passwords and access codes for the smart lock she had installed years ago. The technology had once seemed daunting, but Evelyn had embraced it with quiet determination. It gave her a sense of security and control she valued deeply. Now, that control was more vital than ever. Evelyn powered on her laptop and logged into the home smart system. The interface was clean, intuitive, a perfect match for her patient, methodical nature. She navigated to the user access list and scrolled through the names, Daniel, Jenna, Claire, and even a temporary code for a repairman from last year. Her heart tightened slightly, but she steeled herself. This was not about anger. It was about boundaries. One by one, she revoked every access code. Daniel's code vanished with a quiet click. Jenna's followed. Claire's disappeared as well, along with every other key that had once opened the door without her explicit permission. Then, she created a new code, a 4-digit sequence generated randomly, with no personal significance that anyone could guess. It was stored securely in her notebook, alongside the deed and the utility bills. Evelyn smiled faintly at the irony. After years of welcoming everyone through that front door, she was now the gatekeeper, the sole master of entry. Next, she contacted the local utility companies. Speaking calmly and professionally, she arranged for the temporary suspension of the water service, enough to alert her family that something had changed without plunging the house into darkness. Electricity would remain on for the refrigerator and alarm systems, preserving the essentials. She even called Maria, the longtime cleaning woman who knew every inch of the house. No visits this week, Evelyn instructed firmly, unless arranged through me. Maria hesitated but understood immediately. "I'll make sure, Mrs. Harper," she replied softly. Evelyn ended the call feeling a strange mixture of relief and resolve. She wasn't vindictive. She wasn't seeking revenge. She was simply reclaiming what was hers. For years, she had given freely, assuming her generosity would be met with gratitude and respect. Instead, it had been taken for granted, assumed to be infinite and unquestionable. No more. Later that evening, Evelyn sat back on the porch with a cup of tea, the fading light painting the sky in shades of lavender and gold. She watched the river flow steadily, the gentle current carrying away the heaviness she had carried for too long. Her phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. "Hey Mom, did something happen with the lock? We can't get in." She read the text twice, then chose not to reply. Another came from Jenna, a little later. "We're at the house but nothing's working, no water, no Wi-Fi. Can you please call us?" Evelyn's fingers hovered over the screen but she stayed silent. This was the consequence of assumptions. The consequence of forgetting who built the foundation. The next days passed with a quiet intensity. Calls and texts came in waves, growing more desperate and confused. Evelyn didn't answer. She busied herself tending to her garden, pruning the roses and watering the late summer blooms, grounding herself in the steady rhythm of life outside the turmoil. She thought about the birthday cakes made without asking, the emergency grocery runs, the nights she stayed up late packing bags that no longer included her. Her labor had been unseen, her presence assumed, her value overlooked. But now, the house was hers again. The rules were hers to set. She drafted a formal letter to her family, clear and concise. No emotion, just fact. The lake house was private property, owned solely by her. Future visits required her written permission. She outlined the dates of unauthorized access and reminded them of her right to restrict entry at any time. She sent the letter certified mail, keeping a copy for herself. The act felt empowering, like reclaiming a piece of her identity that had been quietly stripped away. Days later, Claire called, the one family member who seemed to sense the depth of the shift. They spoke gently, acknowledging the fractures and the hurt. Claire suggested a weekend visit for just the two of them and her daughter, a small step toward rebuilding. Evelyn agreed, feeling a flicker of hope. She knew healing wouldn't come quickly, nor would forgiveness be given lightly. But for the first time in years, she felt seated firmly at the head of her own table. This was not a story of loss, but of reclamation. Of setting boundaries not out of spite, but out of self-respect. Evelyn Harper had spent a lifetime giving. Now, she would spend the rest living intentionally, choosing where to place her peace, her love, and her strength. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. The air was still that morning, a soft hush settling over the riverside home as the sun climbed slowly above the tall Oregon pines. Evelyn Harper stood on the porch, her hands folded loosely before her, eyes tracing the gentle ripple of the Willamette River that had been her companion for so many years. The silence around her wasn't empty, it was filled with possibility, a quiet space where new stories could begin. In the weeks since she had changed the locks and sent out the formal letters, the house had become more than a refuge, it was a place of reclamation. No longer just a house shaped by loss and quiet betrayal, it had transformed into a sanctuary of hope and resilience. Evelyn found solace in tending her garden, where the lavender and wild roses bloomed defiantly, much like her own spirit. The earth smelled rich and comforting beneath her fingers, grounding her in the present. Days were now punctuated by simple pleasures, curling up with a well-worn novel by the fireplace, sipping tea as the sunlight filtered through lace curtains, and watching the birds build nests in the ancient oak outside. Evelyn cherished the stillness, not as loneliness, but as the peaceful rhythm of a life reclaimed. One bright Saturday morning, as the farmer's market bustled quietly in the nearby town, Evelyn's path crossed unexpectedly with Richard, a man whose presence seemed to carry the warmth of the sun itself. He sold honey from his small orchard just outside Asheville, and his hands, weathered by years of honest labor, held jars of amber sweetness that caught the light like captured sunbeams. Their first conversation began over blueberries, a fleeting exchange that blossomed into shared stories of loss and renewal. Richard listened with a gentle attentiveness that Evelyn hadn't realized she'd been missing. There was no rush, no pressure, just two souls who had weathered storms and were learning how to trust the sun again. Weekends found Richard visiting the river house, where they cooked together in the cozy kitchen, read on the porch as the breeze whispered through the leaves, and he taught her the art of tying fishing knots, something Evelyn had only pretended to understand for years. Their friendship grew, quiet and steady, a testament to the gentle power of connection that doesn't need to shout to be heard. Meanwhile, across town, Claire, Evelyn's youngest, reached out with a soft invitation. "Mom," she said one afternoon over the phone, "how about a weekend, just you, me, and Mia? No distractions, just us." The offer was a balm to Evelyn's heart. She longed for moments of genuine closeness, a chance to rebuild bridges without the weight of past wounds. The trip became a sanctuary in itself, a weekend of laughter, puzzles, and late-night stories by the fire, where memories were created anew, tender and unhurried. Then, one quiet afternoon, a package arrived on Evelyn's porch. Inside was a small box wrapped simply, and nestled within were a set of keys, a faded photograph of the family taken years ago at the river house, and a worn recipe card, the one for blueberry scones that Jenna had borrowed long ago but never returned. No note accompanied the gift, but the message was clear, an unspoken apology, a recognition of her irreplaceable place in their lives. It was Daniel who sent it, a quiet gesture that carried the weight of many unspoken words. Evelyn held the keys in her hand, the metal cool and familiar. She didn't rush to open the door to the past or to forgiveness. The keys were a symbol, not just of a house, but of choice, of power reclaimed. She placed them carefully in a drawer among her most cherished possessions, neither locking them away nor tossing them aside. Love, she had learned, was not about entitlement or expectation. It was about effort and respect, about asking for permission instead of assuming. It was a delicate dance of giving and receiving, of boundaries honored and hearts held open. In the weeks that followed, Evelyn moved forward with a calm certainty. She knew some doors would remain closed for now, and some wounds would take time to heal. But she also knew she was no longer defined by absence or erasure. She was a woman who had rebuilt herself from the inside out, rooted in the quiet strength of her own worth. Her life was no longer a story of betrayal and solitude. It was a testament to renewal, to the enduring power of peace found not in others' acceptance but in one's own embrace. The river flowed on, steady and true, carrying her forward toward new horizons. And Evelyn Harper, with the sun warming her face and the scent of lavender in the air, was finally home, in every sense of the word.